I think in order to build a trusting relationship between all of the leadership and engineers, it's better if those people have seen their leaders be productive. This is a person that I look up to, a person that can teach me something, and a person that can guide me.
One of the most common questions I get from organizations, in fact, kind of the reason why I started Better Everyday Studios, was to figure out how to transition from being a successful individual contributor into being a people manager. And today's guest has some unique insight into answering that question. Laura Crabtree is the co founder and CEO of Epsilon 3. She was previously one of the key members of SpaceX's Dragon program, being there from the initial design phases of the spacecraft all the way through the successful launch of People in 2020. In today's conversation, we're going to learn about the things that Laura found out about leadership in those high pressure situations. We're going to talk a little bit about how important communication is for all phases of leadership. And then finally look at what she thinks it takes to successfully move from being an individual contributor into a people manager. If this is your first time listening to the Leadership Launchpad, I want to make sure you take a minute to subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you're already subscribed, then I ask that you take just one moment to share this show with at least one other person. That, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. So with that, let's get into the discussion with Laura Crabtree. Laura, it has been a long time. It's been 5 years. I think it's at least 5 years.
At least, yeah.
So,
It's been a while.
yeah, so we worked together or kind of, adjacent to one another at SpaceX for a long time. You catch me up. What have you been doing? You started your own company after leaving SpaceX,
I did.
Epsilon 3.
So I was at SpaceX until 2020.
Yeah.
And I try to play down what happened in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020.
Yeah.
So
We'll get there.
yeah. So I left in August of 2020 with kind of a plan to reinvent some other place in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that, spoke to me the most was software.
Okay.
And I had built a bunch of software tools, sort of driving requirements and things at my previous companies. So I had done it multiple times. And when I left, a lot of startups, people that I talked to around the industry in aerospace, in particular space, and aviation, had wanted software tools, better software tools for just mission operations and testing.
Yeah.
And so that's where we started.
This isn't really what we're going to focus on today, but like what drives that interested? Because you saw the Dragon program through the whole life cycle, from the very beginning all the way to launching humans. There's so many different aspects of that. What led you to the software thing? Like, what is it that operations software needs solved?
It's funny, when I started at SpaceX, there were no concept of operations documents. There was no training. There was not even flight software. And the first thing I had to do was figure out, what are the operators in mission control going to do?
Yeah. And
how do we compartmentalize each person's job? And then how do we train them to do those jobs?
Okay.
And without a design on the software or a design of the vehicle, to be honest, we had to sort of start with, what are the things that we need to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And when we got into mission control after having no software, we discovered that we had a lot of people doing a small number of jobs. And so the directive from on high was no paper in mission control.
Yeah.
And so we had to start with, how do we get to that eventuality of no paper in mission control? Because we started printing out PDF documents and we started creating Word templates, and that proved to be a fruitless effort, which everybody breaks Word templates, everybody breaks PDF documents, and there's no traceability of any action that's been taken.
Yeah.
And so how are we eventually going to get to pilot co-pilot, which was the directive?
Yeah.
And the only way to do that was to have better training, which you were a part of, and helping with some of the training. And then how do we, have better software tools?
Yeah.
And so one of the main things that was sort of my secondary or tertiary job was figuring out what tools we needed to get the operators what they needed, the information they needed when they needed it on
Yeah.
console.
Yeah. That's incredible. Just, I love the way, you mentioned pilot, co-pilot. And so essentially what
Yeah.
you mean is you want two people to control Dragon. And
Yeah.
that's it. That's all you need.
Or no
monitor.
people, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just interesting, because I'm a reservist in the Space Force. And I have some friends that work at Planet as well.
Yeah.
And just the difference in kind of the culture I think in the Space Force right now, there's something like 3,500 people controlling a few hundred satellites versus,
There are a lot.
the reverse,
Right.
and so much of that comes down to just kind of that top end design and just decisions that are made. That obviously took a lot of, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure going, what
It's an understatement of the century.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just curious, like, what did you learn being in the midst of, this is probably the highest profile, most can't fail mission that SpaceX had.
Yeah.
What are some of just like the lessons you learned about how to be successful in that kind of environment?
Well, if you look at the first mission, so Dragon 1, which was 2 orbits and come home, you're looking at, we in Mission Control, many of us gave it a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
You plan for every eventuality, everything you can think of that could go wrong, and you train for it. So there were instances where we were planning and to train for 2 failures deep.
Okay.
So if you think of thruster failures, you have one thruster fail, one on the other side. Can you still get home? Yeah. If you go 3 failures deep, there are things you can do, but you're not planning for that. So
Sure.
What is your threshold for how many failures you can actually take to successfully complete the mission?
Interesting.
And so you basically train the operators for every worst case scenario you can think of. And if you find a worst case scenario that the software team can then mitigate for in flight, they go write software code to fix those problems before you fly.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we tested the software past where people thought it was necessary to do so with people.
Interesting.
Because testing software in automated setting is different than
Sure.
if the people controlling the vehicle are actually looking at it and evaluating data in real time.
Yeah.
And so I think what we learned was, here's your design criteria. You want to go past your design criteria to really make sure that you have got all of the things under control that you can.
Yeah.
And then you basically check everything and check it again.
Yeah.
And making sure that also you are putting all of your operations team into the most stressful scenarios possible.
Yeah.
So the most lifelike, the most stressful, so that when they get into the real-time operations and things happen, which inevitably they will, nobody freaks out.
Yeah.
And those were hard days.
That was my favorite part of pilot training was there's very high fidelity simulators.
I've seen. I want to fly them, but I've seen them.
Yeah, they're incredible. And I remember very clearly when I was flying the T6, the first plane you fly when you're in pilot training in the Air Force, you'd kind of go in and there would be whole sim sessions where you're there for about 90 minutes. And it was just kind of like the instructor's over there. It's just like, can they kill you?
Yes.
So it'd just be like, let's do an engine failure here.
Yes.
Okay, you survived that. Okay, let's back it up a mile and give you an engine failure there. Can you make it now? And it was a great way to kind of pressure test and push the envelope. But one thing that I heard in your answers, it sounded like you were putting the operators in as stressful a position possible, but you still drew some line of what makes sense to test. So you're not just there forever. And I feel like that's kind of a really one lesson that can be applied in a lot of places, but certainly to managers, is how do you figure out where to draw the line of what you need to plan for so that you're not just always there. I know in engineering fields, they always say like engineers like to engineer. You just want to like keep going.
Yeah, you do.
How do you, from an operational perspective, how did you draw that line of know when to stop?
Well, at some point you don't. You always have a Kobayashi Maru scenario that you give everybody. You always give everybody at least one place where they are going to fail.
Yes.
And they have to like internalize it and recover from it.
I like that.
Because there's always unexpected things that can happen.
Yeah.
And you may have a scenario like that. I haven't seen one,
Yeah.
but well, actually, I did see one. CR7 was one.
Sure.
But for managers, you have to like set the boundaries to past what is easy,
Mm-hmm.
but not so far as to this is unattainable
Mm-hmm.
and the person is never going to complete this.
Mm-hmm.
So, generally what I do with our engineering team is I say, okay, here's the goal. And if you meet this goal, you are at 100% completion of month, a quarter, whatever. Let's set the goal to be 90% so that if you hit 90%, you feel really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always that extra little bit that you could do beyond that so that you could say, well, I hit 100% of what was planned for
Sure.
this quarter, this month.
Yeah.
But it's really hard line. Like where do you draw that line? It's hard.
Yeah, and it's different for everybody too. It's different for each employee of how much they can take, what they're ready for the situation. If your company is in a really risky spot, maybe you can't take, maybe you need to push farther or you can't push as much. It sounds very situational.
Yeah, it's also hard in Q4, which is
Sure,
which is really hard. We were talking about it earlier this week, which is, Q4 is hard to plan for because you can't plan as much as you planned in Q3,
mm-hmm.
knowing that there's 3-4 weeks that people might be in and out. So
Yeah.
That is a hard thing for leadership and managers to plan for.
If only just everybody just worked all the time and it was just easy.
No, everybody needs time off.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is how do you encourage people to be productive and still take time off?
Yeah. We were having this discussion right before we sat down. It sounds like we went through similar phases. So when I was, I think, lucky in the sense that I started at SpaceX 3 months after my daughter was born.
Oh, yeah.
So I came in with like, no, there's lines that I'm not going to cross. But even then, I still didn't realize until much later where I would actually get to points where I would say, okay, I am only going to work 40 hours this week. I'm not going to tell anybody else. I'm not going to ask to reduce my workload.
Yeah.
But I am only going to work 40 hours a week. I have to figure out how to get the important stuff done in those 40 hours. And it just really unlocked a lot because I had to think differently.
Well, then you don't have 45-minute conversations over coffee.
Right.
And which happens a lot. There are a lot of people who are there more time
mm-hmm.
and yet complete the same amount of work that are for us people who are there less.
Yeah.
And that was hard for me because I was there, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for much of my career. And then after my kids were born, I had to leave to go pick them up at school. And that was a hard transition because I wasn't less productive. I was just there less time. And as one of my old managers said, perception is reality. And I hated that he said that to me. But the perception was that I was not physically there.
Yeah.
So in other words, that was everybody's reality was that I was not physically there,
Yeah.
even though after my kids went to bed, I would go back to work.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
It is hard. I was very lucky. After I left SpaceX, the company that I went to was a very similar kind of grind culture. Lots of young people. They incentivized, you get free dinner if you stay past 6 o'clock. And so everybody, and I, going into it, was very clear. I'm like, look, I'm going to leave at 5. Like, I'm going to show up early, so I'm going to be here before everybody else, but I need to be home for dinner and
it's important.
And everything. Yeah. And I was really lucky that I had a manager who was totally fine just kind of clearing the way for that. Like when I'm standing up at 5 and saying bye, she had no problem with it.
And you're not having to like sneak out.
Yeah. Other people might have looked at me a little weird because they were getting ready to stay until 9 o'clock, even though they hadn't shown up until 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
But she gave me that permission and that freedom.
Yeah.
How, shifting kind of to Epsilon 3.
Yeah.
When we talked a couple months ago, there was, we talked a little bit about the challenge of kind of growing managers from individual contributors.
Right.
Sticking on this point of, looking at the productivity over the time, is that one of the difficult things to get managers to value? Because it's so easy to just look at the time.
Well, we're a remote company, so nobody actually looks at the time.
Oh, interesting.
So now the only thing that we look at is productivity.
Yeah.
We only look at how much you're doing, how happy your customers are, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I don't look at how much time people spend because nobody clocks in and clocks out, which is different than when I was at Northrop. When I was at Northrop Grumman, you are bookkeeping every 6 minutes. So every 10th of an hour is book kept. So I would have to
I
put
can't
in,
imagine.
0.3 hours on this job number and 1.5 hours, and it would have to total up to 8 every day or
Wow.
else. And I had to put in, and I don't know how it still works now.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
2009.
Yeah.
So this was a while ago.
Now they just have tracking software. They're like watching your eyes.
Maybe they're like, well, she was looking at this document for 25 minutes. So we're going to round up
Yeah.
to 30 and call this a half an hour.
Yeah.
But, what ends up happening is the leaders, at Epsilon 3 in particular, those are people that have grown into the leadership role.
Mhm.
They are not people that we hired into those roles, because I think in order to build a trusting relationship between all of the leadership and engineers in particular,
Mhm.
it's better if those people have seen their leaders be productive and
Yep.
be sort of one of them,
Yeah.
for them to fully understand and appreciate, this is a person that I look up to, a person that can teach me something, and a
Yep.
person that can guide me.
Yeah.
And I would prefer that.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So let's kind of go through that life cycle then. When you're looking at the individual contributors,
Yeah.
what are the things that are kind of cues to you of this person might be a good people manager versus they're just a really good individual contributor? How are you judging that?
So I think it stems from how other people react to them.
Okay.
And you look at a bunch of younger engineers will look to a more senior engineer that wants to mentor them, that
Mhm.
wants to help them, and they gravitate towards that person or those people.
Mhm.
And those are people who are growing into a more leadership style position.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily just pick somebody who wants it,
Yeah.
because that's how you break an organization.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, people who really want it aren't always the best choice.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's usually the people who don't want it
Yeah.
that are the best choice. And then you have to try to convince them to
Yeah.
lead.
Yeah. I think years ago, I remember hearing like nobody should want to win a Medal of Honor,
No.
because the things you need to go through to
Yeah.
win
And the
that.
things you have to do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense of like if you know what it takes, because especially for like really hard charging successful individual contributors, I think it's really important to be honest that when you become a people manager, almost by default, you have to get less good at
Yeah.
whatever skill that got you there.
Or you
was.
take less time to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
So, when you are an individual contributor and not a people manager, you are doing 100%
Mhm,
work on your own, and
mhm.
maybe on your free time mentoring and helping other people, in our case, looking at their code, reviewing, teaching them best practices, et cetera. But when you become a people manager, you likely have to do as much individual contributor work
Sometimes, yeah,
plus manage people,
yeah.
which is one-on-ones, goal setting, helping them kind of grow into what they would like to be in the
Mhm.
future.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that point for a
Yeah.
second, because I have talked to other people who think the problem with management today is that we don't let managers be just managers. And I've talked with other people who say, no, 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 no. The key is that you have managers who also have individual contributor duties. And if you don't, then that's gonna break it. And certainly it's probably different in different organizations.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you come down a little bit more on or is the IC duties just a reality of the fact that you're a growing business and you need people to do it? Or is it kind of a deliberate choice if you want them to kind of stay?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. So when I was at Northrop Grumman, we were a matrixed organization, which is,
Okay.
you have a functional manager, and then you have a
Mm,
project or a program manager.
sure.
And so your functional manager, you'd have like the systems engineering group, and all the systems engineers get farmed out to all the different programs. And then you have a program manager. So you have two managers that you report to.
Yeah.
One where you're being graded against all the other systems engineers,
Mhm.
and then one where you're being graded against the people in your program.
Okay.
And the person that writes your review is your lead on the systems engineering side.
Okay.
So
Like the
on
functional
your
leader.
functional leader.
Okay.
So I had two managers I was reporting to,
Yeah.
and two people driving what I needed to do.
Yeah.
That's really confusing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my first
Yeah.
foray into well, what does my manager need me to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it was very hard for me to
Mm-hmm.
handle that.
Yeah.
So when I went to SpaceX, I had one manager and one direction to go in.
Mm-hmm.
And that manager was as productive as I was,
Mm-hmm.
and yet still managed all the people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think SpaceX maybe does like the complete opposite, whereas they don't actually, well, at the time, they didn't really teach people how to manage.
Yeah.
And so you ended up with managers that didn't need to be managers
Mm-hmm.
because they were leaders in the technical aspect. And sometimes that's a really good thing, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think I land somewhere in the middle, which is you need to spend, I don't know, 25% of your time managing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other 75% of your time, you need to be showing all the people that work for you how much you can accomplish
Mm-hmm.
so that you're all working together towards the same goal.
Okay.
And so I think the most successful teams that I've worked on are where the manager spends time and thinks about how they want to manage the people that work for them
Yep.
and contributes
Yep.
individually.
Yep.
But it's not 50-50. It's
Sure.
somewhat skewed towards individual contributor.
Towards the work.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Since you're growing leaders,
Yeah.
what are some of the common pitfalls you've seen people fall into as they try to? I really like to focus on this transition point of going from IC into first time manager. What are the kind of common challenges that you see there?
Well, one, it's, you have to spend time managing.
Sure.
So you
Okay.
have to,
Yeah,
you have to actually be mindful of
yeah,
that.
realizing that you've made a change.
Right.
Yeah.
And realizing that all of these people look to you for guidance and
Mhm,
leadership.
mhm.
And then the other, which we just kind of touched on, which is, you forget sometimes if you go all the way towards managing that you still have that individual contributor piece.
Mhm.
And it could be one of the same, kind of one way or the other.
Yeah.
And then kind of the other thing is, how do you organize yourself? How do you organize one-on-ones? How do you keep track when somebody asks you, hey, in the next year or two, I want to get a promotion. What are the steps that I need to do? What are the things I need to show you to get there? And really like laying those things out and communicating that either to your leadership above you or to the person what they need to do to be able to see and realize that goal.
Yeah.
And the goals for the people should always be part of the growing business.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I have a hard time with, which is like, if your goal is I want to, get a promotion, but it doesn't entail I want to do these things to show you that I deserve a promotion. It's just I want a promotion. It's really guiding people towards what are the things that sort of drive your growth and the business growth that you can do to prove to us that you need to get to the next level.
Yeah. So it sounds like the biggest pitfall you've seen is just people not realizing that management is a skill.
It's an organizational
that
piece.
they need to now develop.
I think that's across the board of every place I've worked.
Oh, interesting.
People don't think of management as a skill. They think of it, it's a placement. And I think we as an industry, maybe in aerospace, could think more diligently about how we teach people to manage and speak to one another.
Well, it's tough because, obviously we're in the middle of, Boeing is in the middle of a pretty bad spot.
Yes.
The thing that a lot of people say, I grew up in Seattle, so I know a lot of people from there, and they even point to, it was when like the business types came in, and there's, I think we have lots of examples within the industry where too much of a focus on business is bad.
True.
So it kind of leads to, we're going to pretend it's not there. We need to focus on the technical side of things. But it sounds like that's where that balance comes in of kind of the time that you're spending on it and always staying grounded in the technicals.
Yeah. What I tell my kids is, you have to balance and everything in moderation.
Sure.
So I always tell my kids, you've got to eat your vegetables, but you can't only eat vegetables. You have to eat the meat also. So it's, you have to look at it as a piece of the moderation schema.
Yeah.
So you can't just hire finance people
Mhm.
and expect them to run the business. And you
Mhm.
can't have just engineers and
Mhm.
expect them to run the business.
Mhm.
You have to have them working together. And
Yeah.
it's the same with management versus IC work, or hiring and teaching people to be managers and then expecting them to just manage. They're not going to know all of the technical things that
Yeah.
people are doing, all the nitty gritty technical decisions that are being made. And I
Yeah.
think that's the important thing, is having engineers that understand the technical decisions that are being made, the risks that are being weighed, and then balancing that with what's your schedule? How do you guys make money? How do you continue to show growth in the business,
Yeah.
through kind of a partnership between the business aspect and the engineering aspect?
Yeah. How did you develop those skills? Was it trial by error? Did you have any kind of specific things you did to try to develop that in yourself?
So I when I was in high school,
Mhm.
I worked at a bagel shop, which
Okay.
is like going way, way back.
Everybody needs a service job at some point.
Everyone needs a service job. This is how you learn to
Yes.
speak to people
Yes.
and how you learn to deal with adversity.
Yes.
Um, and I got yelled at
Mhm.
quite a lot, actually, because I was in high school.
Yeah.
And there was a time when a customer yelled at me, and I looked at my manager at the time, and he was, I don't know, 25 or something.
Mhm.
And he said, "Laura, it's okay. Go to the back." Because he could see in my face that I did not want to be there.
Yeah.
So I walked to the back and I just sat down and I thought to myself, I need to learn how to like not let things like that affect me.
Mm.
And so over the course of the next couple of years and through through college and through my first couple of years working,
Mhm.
I developed a thicker skin
Mhm.
with respect to what people would say to me.
Yeah.
And when I was working at Northrop Grumman, I lived in England and I was working in operations there. So I was working 12-hour rotating shifts with a bunch of ex-military
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
And the way they speak to one another is completely different than the way that just engineers in college speak to one another,
Yeah.
just by default.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn to adapt. And I went back to the skills that I sort of honed in my service professions, because that was only one of the
Mhm.
service jobs
Sure.
that I worked.
Yeah.
I had 4, which they all have like a special place in my heart because I learned so many
Yeah.
good skills
Yeah.
through that. But I went back to that and I just thought, these people, they mean well. I have to default to everybody means well. And so they don't mean to
Yep.
make me feel the way that they're making me feel. So I have to think about it from like, what is the intent of what they said?
Yep.
And so I learned how to speak to different people. And that's sort of the start, in my opinion, of management
Yeah.
and leadership, is learning how to adapt the way that you respond in different situations
Yes.
and not letting people sort of ruffle your feathers
Yeah.
and because of what they say or how they act or
Yeah.
what they look like or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that was when I knew that, I could speak to anyone and I could sort of internalize and talk about it later and laugh about it.
Yeah.
That was when I knew it was okay
Yeah.
to work in any situation.
Yeah.
And when I started at SpaceX, it was more of the same because people from all walks of life. I worked a little bit out on the production floor,
Mhm.
doing some welding. I worked with the structures team and the GNC team,
Yeah.
and they all have a different way of speaking to one another.
Yeah.
And being in operations, you work with everybody from the top all the way down to the technicians.
Yeah.
And it's the same way in management and leadership
Yeah.
because every team is made up of a smattering of different personalities.
Yeah. Different people.
So that was how
Interesting.
I learned. But also, SpaceX at the time had a course that you went through when you
Mhm.
became a lead.
Mhm.
And I went through this training course, which basically was like goal setting, how to speak to different people. And I thought back to my times at all those
Mhm.
different jobs. And I thought, well, I've learned those skills. Now here's how to apply them,
Yeah.
which was great.
Yeah. I think you're totally right in that adaptability is one of the, I think if there was one lesson that I would want every new manager to get is that when you become a manager, it's not about you.
No,
Like
it's about everybody else.
that's the switch. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so it's about, I do think there's a tendency to still have this feeling of, oh, but I'm the leader. People need to adapt to me. This is how I communicate. So you need to
Yes.
fall in line. And we maybe kind of exacerbate that problem because it's sometimes true at the highest of levels, like at a
Sometimes.
CEO, like maybe you're coached on like how to talk to the CEO and some,
Maybe.
in certain situations. But it's pretty rare. And certainly anything below that, it shouldn't be there for
Yeah.
sure. Even at the highest levels, it really shouldn't be there probably. They should be adjusting to the people that they are now serving.
Right. Well, if you are a servant leader,
Yeah.
which I think I have defaulted to
Okay.
based on my
Yep.
experiences. That's what I've been told, at least.
Yep.
I didn't know that there were certain types of
Yep.
leaders, but
Yep.
here I am. And, I hired someone and he said, you're very servant leader oriented. And I thought, I don't know what that means. Let me go look it up. So I learned what that meant, which is, I adapt and I listen to all of the people
Mhm.
that work at Epsilon 3 and that work for the company to try to unblock them from whatever is in their way, whether
Yep.
it be personal, professional, different people within the organization, et cetera. I try to just like make their work life as simple and easy as possible. Here are the goals, and then we set goals together. It's not, Laura says you have to do this, and therefore, everybody falls in line because
Yeah.
who would want to work for that person?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Yeah. I totally agree with you on that one. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I'm glad we got to reconnect.
Yeah.
I think it's been a really really great discussion. We've found similar lessons, I think, through the at least the certain similar
Yeah.
experiences that we've had, which is
Absolutely.
really great.
So what was your favorite plane to fly?
Oh, my favorite, honestly, my favorite job I've probably ever had was as a T1 instructor pilot.
Okay.
So T1 is a little business jet. It's
Okay.
based off of Beech 400, and so it was basically like I got my own private jet that I just flew around the country
Oh,
in.
that's cool.
Usually, I had somebody else, and I'm like teaching them, but I just that was a great time.
That's awesome. How long did you do that for?
3 years.
Okay.
And so I think there's something special about, the operations side of things,
Absolutely.
that it's just, I think pilot training was really, really cool because you were in this really compact environment where, you're at an airfield where there's maybe 30 airplanes all buzzing around, where half the people in them don't know what they're doing.
Scary,
You,
but also cool.
you got to be on the ball. You got to be like,
You gotta be
okay.
paying attention at all times.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
That's
a lot of
cool.
fun. It was a lot of fun.
So you still fly?
Unfortunately, it's expensive to fly when the military is not paying
Yeah, that's
for
true.
it. So I haven't been flying for a while.
Okay.
I recently moved out of LA up to Northern California,
Okay.
and so I'm hoping to get back into it because it was a lot of fun.
I gotta learn. I don't actually know how to fly a plane, but I can fly a spacecraft.
I bet it's funny. One of the hardest things to teach people about flying a plane is how to talk on the radios.
Oh,
So you would have a leg up.
I can do that.
Because really what flying a plane is it's a lesson in how to deal with too much information.
I can do that.
Exactly. You're used to looking at lots of instruments, listening to multiple people talk
Yep.
into your head at the same time, figuring out what's important for you and making the decision.
Yep.
That's really the hardest part about flying. a
Okay.
plane. The like push pull like
Then I can
stuff
fly.
that's easy. Yeah.
Okay.
You'd pick it up pretty fast.
It's funny. I was flying with a friend of mine a couple years ago, and he said the same thing. And he said, "I think you've got that down because every time I'm in mission control with you, there's 10 people talking, and I see you have 10 different loops on,
Yeah.
and I say Laura blah or whatever your call sign is, and you respond right away."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I can take 10 inputs and figure out which one is important at any given time."
Yeah.
And that's the special skill
It is.
that he said.
It is.
So it's interesting that you said the same thing.
Yeah, in Afghanistan, very often we're flying overhead, and we'd be talking on 3 radios at once, and
That's awesome.
and flying the plane and stuff. And it's a friend of mine. I remember when I first joined the Air Force, I was with an F-16 unit,
Okay.
and one of the more experienced pilots said, "If you are flying the plane, you're behind because your job isn't to fly the plane. Your job is to employ the plane."
Tell the plane what needs to be done and let the plane do it.
Exactly. And so the flying of it needs to be second nature. And
Okay.
so I think that's why it's interesting kind of to loop back to the beginning of the conversation about kind of the strategic direction with Dragon early
Yeah.
on to like make it simpler and simpler. It's because like it's not that we care about flying Dragon. We care about doing something with this
Right.
spacecraft. We're not holding on tightly to this particular position. It's just we want to go do stuff.
Right.
So
You want to rendezvous with the space station.
yeah,
And that was actually most of the training was talking,
I bet.
was teaching people how to communicate with one another,
Mhm.
teaching people how to listen to NASA or any other inputs, FAA, et cetera,
Mhm.
and process the information that they gave to make decisions on what was coming next.
Yeah.
Rather than, there were a lot of things happening in the background, figuring out rendezvous profiles, et cetera.
Yeah.
But as that became more and more automated, more of the job was communication, coordination,
Yes.
data input, data output,
Yes.
rather than actually physically flying.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And that's what really unlocks
Yeah.
potential.
It's all about communication.
Yeah.
To go back to all the way
Full
back
thing,
to
yeah.
the beginning, it's all about listening and communication.
Yeah.
Those are the keys to good flying of Dragon, good flying of the F-16, and good leadership.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that is a perfect way to put a cap on the episode.
I love it.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
We definitely got to keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.